Welcome. This is the Eastern Influenced Corporate Leader podcast, hosted by Alana May Mitchell, where each episode we tune in to Eastern wisdom.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Eastern Influence Corporate Leader. I hope you've been enjoying the conversations and especially those meditations at the end, tuning into those. Also, I'd like to mention that there is a Facebook community called the Eastern Influence Corporate Leader Community that you can join, and I'll let you know how you can do that in the comments in the post. So I am so inspired by the guest that we have on today's show. And I wanted to give what is his speaker's intro because it's just so brilliant. So the question is, can you imagine 1 billion people meditating daily? Not a million, but a billion. That's what Tom Cronin, our guest today, founder of the Stillness Project, producer and co-writer of the Portal film and book, is out to do. After a successful but highly stressful job in finance, Tom discovered meditation as a tool for living powerfully. After studying meditation for 20 years in India, Bali, and Australia, he's now taught thousands of people from all over the world and is a sought-after teacher, speaker, author, and film producer. He has taught meditation and mindfulness in some of the companies across the world, including Amazon, Coca-Cola, Qantas, UBS, Commonwealth Bank, and Fairfax Media. As a global thought leader, Tom has been showcased on Channel 9's The Morning Show, ABC Radio, and publications like Vogue, the Sydney Morning Herald, and Huffington Post. With 6 books published now, he travels globally and also in COVID virtually, presenting his extraordinary keynotes. I'm delighted to be in conversation with Tom today to share this with you. And I'd love to welcome you, Tom. Hi, how are you going?
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me along today, Alana.
Oh, you're so welcome. And I'll also touch on that so that says that Tom's a meditation teacher, right? And Tom taught me Vedic meditation we were just reminiscing probably about 5 years ago now.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And so do you still do those teachings of the transcendental meditation?
Yeah, absolutely. I teach, obviously during COVID, we moved into a Zoom format, which is very unique and new. It's not something that's been done before traditionally. But, I think one of the great things about the Vedic practice and Vedic teachings is about adaptability and serving the need of the time. And so the time is needing a lot less stress, and teaching this type of meditation was critical. So we teach on Zoom, and we'll be going back to weekend workshops in person as well. But we also have an online format which allows people to access it in the comfort of their own homes, anytime, any place.
Oh, so beautiful. I love how that adaptability has come through with the ways that people are delivering. Like I, for example, was on a call early this morning, it was quite early, from the US. And that wasn't something that I would have considered before. So it's there. I also want to touch on the stress aspect, because I know for the people listening that stress can be a part of leadership. And there are some times when there's good stress, like a little bit of, what's the word? Like tension that creates, movement and excitement and momentum. And there also can be times of stress that are a little bit more challenging. So I just wanted to dive into, Tom, can you share a bit about your experience with stress? And even I think your story, from what I've seen, goes into anxiety a little bit. So just touch a little bit on that for us, please.
Yeah, what a great topic to lead into. Stress is I think the World Health Organization calls it an epidemic of the 21st century. So, well, they do actually, I know that for sure. And so what we want to look at is, what is stress? And we think of stress as a situation. And when I used to tell people I worked as a broker, they'd say, oh, that must be stressful, because they think of the situation as being stressful. But what we want to do is break stress down. And what stress is a stress response to circumstances based upon the variability of the subject, that's the person that's having the response. And this is the variable. This is the interesting thing. And we'll look at an analogy. So a 5-year-old, when they get their special treat from Nan and Pop, which is a Mr. Whippy ice cream on a hot summer's day, and this is a rare occasion when Nan and Pop will treat them to something really special, like a Mr. Whippy ice cream, and that ice cream just falls off the ice cream cone and melts before their eyes on the concrete. And they know that Nan and Pop are very sparse with their money, and they're not going to get another one because they wasted it. And the stress response in that 5-year-old child is gargantuan. It's a huge, overwhelming release of emotions as the circumstance, a loss of something precious in their life, leads to a huge upheaval in their emotional state. And it can happen in a nanosecond. But that same person, as they grow up and they're now in their 45s, 50s, 55, 60s, the same thing can happen, exactly the same thing to happen on a hot summer's day, and their Mr. Whippy ice cream falls off the ice cream cone. And they don't have the same response. And so what we know here is that it's not the circumstance, it's the relationship that the subject is having with the circumstance that determines whether there's going to be a stress response or not. And there's a lot of factors that are going to determine what that relationship is with the circumstance. It could be that their nervous system is very frayed, they're not looking after it, they're in an overwhelmed state because they're tired, they're not sleeping well, they're up all night on Netflix, they're drinking, smoking, not eating well, they don't have a calm mind, their mind's been fed lots and lots of information, so there's lots of stimulation in the nervous system, lots of cortisol in the nervous system. And so the slightest little thing can trigger a stress response very quickly. And that's what happened to me. I was working on a trading room floor in finance, and I had very little awareness about my mind, my body, and my nervous system. And I just was doing things that were very unmindful. That was taking lots of drugs, drinking, staying up till 3, 4, 5 in the morning, sometimes 6, 7, 8 in the morning with no sleep, on weekends, going to raves and parties and nightclubs, drinking a lot, working frenetically on trading room floor all day. So lots of cortisol, lots of adrenaline. So my body was at this sort of on this knife edge all the time, where I was getting these extreme stress responses, and they compounded and compounded because I was having these stress responses to circumstances very easily. It meant more cortisol, more adrenaline, and it snowballs. I couldn't sleep because I'm not sleeping, I'm not getting rested. And there's an ongoing exacerbation and deterioration of the stress response happening in my body, to the point where eventually it had a complete breakdown and my whole system collapsed. And this is what we call in engineering terms a bifurcation point. So bifurcation point is that point where in engineering, the steel, it no longer has resistance to the stress being put on it, and it breaks. And it's that point where they measure, what sort of load can the bridge take before it breaks? What's the load that the scaffolding can take before it breaks? And so that's that bifurcation point where it breaks down. And so I hit my bifurcation point in my late 20s, where my system just collapsed because the stress response was so extreme to circumstances. Now, here's the fascinating thing, and I'll kind of wind up this long story short here, that I learned to meditate, and in the middle of that sort of meltdown, and I started to change my lifestyle habits. And because I was meditating, because I was feeling calmer, because I was producing more more serotonin and oxytocin and melatonin, and reducing my cortisol and adrenaline, that I actually went back into that job for 16 more years without having the stress responses. Yeah, so I worked fully all up 26 years as a broker. And the first 10 years were having extreme stress responses, and the last 16 as a meditator, not taking drugs and not drinking and eating well and looking after my nervous system, my mind, being very mindful of what I'm doing with my body, then I sustained a very successful career without having that stress response.
Oh, wow. That's a whole nother layer of the story that I didn't know was there. So
Yeah.
There's so many things in that. With the, probably on the changes that you made. So some of the things that people might try: meditation, eating more healthily, the smoking, the drinking, the drugs, etc. I'm interested in, when you were making that shift in yourself in the organization, did that have an impact on the people around you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to, relationships thrive on, excuse me, relationships thrive on unity and connection. And so my clients and my friends and a lot of my colleagues, we were united in those particular patterns of behavior. But when I stopped, behaving that way, then that caused disconnection. Some friendships dropped away. And I had to find a new way of integrating this new lifestyle of mine into that culture, which was by and large built on drinking and drugs. And interestingly, what happened was I had to find a point of difference that was still going to enable connection, but wasn't going to, particularly with my clients, that wasn't going to, deteriorate our lifestyles. So what I started to do was take the clients and their wives to dinner, to the opera, to plays and musicals, and take the clients sometimes to yoga retreats and surfing retreats up in Byron Bay, and places that I could add value to their lives on a physical and mental level. And so what happened was, it was really interesting that I became like, it became a point of difference, and it was really quite powerful for my career in the end, because it allowed me to sort of carve in a niche that wasn't really happening there. And so what we have to do is, when we have a problem, we have to look for a creative solution. And the interesting thing, when we are in a stress response, our brain contracts that frontal lobe, which is the creative, intuitive, and wise sort of decision-making part of the brain. And so interestingly, when we're stressed and we need more creative ideas to our problems, we have less of them, which is why we stay in that stressed state.
Yeah.
When I started meditating, what happens when we meditate is it opens up that frontal lobe of the brain, and we get this incredible creative impulses that happen during and outside our meditation. And we start finding incredible problem-solving capabilities and adaptive capacity. Adaptive capacity is the ability to continually evolve and adapt and change to life's continuing problems. And without adaptive capacity, which is what happens when we're stressed, we compound that stress response, we exacerbate the stress response. But when we meditate, we increase the adaptive capacity, which means we decrease the stress response, because we're always finding creative solutions to our problems. And that was a big problem for me. But lo and behold, within the ether all around us lies every solution to every problem. And I just had to happen to have the tool that would enable me to access that field where the solutions lie.
And with your meditations, how long or how frequently do you meditate each day to have that kind of massive impact on your life?
Yeah, look, it's not like we have to do hours upon hours. It's really quite fascinating how impacting certain meditations are. Now, I say certain because not all meditations are the same. If we just, some meditations are going to be quite shallow and not get as deep as others. And what we want to look for is a technique that enables us to transcend. That's to go deep into a space of deep stillness and silence, beyond the thinking mind and beyond the feeling body. Those two things, the thinking mind and feeling body, the ego, they're our identity that we get very attached to. And so a lot of meditations kind of enhance and exacerbate the ego, because it's about exacerbating the I that's actually doing the gratitude, or the I that's doing the chakra clearing. And so, not that they're not good meditations, I still do some of those meditations myself, but we do want to explore, who am I without thinking, without feeling? What is that transcendent state of expansive, unbounded eternality that lies within us all? It is all of us. And finding a technique that really allows that to happen. So for me, it was just 20 minutes morning and afternoon with that powerful meditation.
Yeah, not a long time to carve out at all. I mean, you could do that before work, or you could do that during your lunchtime or of an evening. And that's something with the people that have come on the show. They do mention that they meditate usually twice a day. So they'll have their morning, like they're energizing, that kind of thing. And then of an evening, they'll have like the closing of the day, like to rest and sleep well as well. And so with the meditation and the creativity, I just want to touch on that for a second. So how, because I know that we mentioned at the start that you do corporate work. So how do you frame up meditation as a way that it can inform creativity in someone's role, and they don't just get, feeling relaxed and calm from the meditation? There can at times also be these other things that you've spoken about.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many things and benefits that come out of meditation. It's a very dynamic practice. It's not just becoming numb or empty or silent and mute. It's actually very dynamic. It's almost very difficult to not be successful with some of these deeper transcending styles of meditation, because when you transcend, you go into the field of pure potential. All potential lies in this subtle field. It's not an empty space. It's a full space of all possibility. So everything that we can see around us, like this pen or this mouse or this phone, was all cognized as an initial seed of creative impulse that was extracted out of the field of possibility. And then it goes from the formlessness, where it exists at all times, into the minute form, which is just a thought form. So everything that's been designed and created was a thought form initially. Then they start mapping it out as a maybe two-dimensional drawing or a written idea. Then they might start doing 3D drawings on a computer or something. And then they start putting the parts together and building it into a physical form. But all that comes from the field. And so what we need to know is that everything that's not being designed and created yet is in the field right now. And that's a phenomenal idea, to think, what can I manifest and create? We talked about before we got on this podcast about, what you're creating, is that we can create, literally, who would have thought 100 years ago we could create this iPhone? But it was always possible. It was always in the field. So what we have to ask is, what's in that field that's yet being created that we can create? And that's really fascinating, because it's everything and anything. And so this is why a lot of companies are starting to bring meditation into their workplace, because when we're operating from our thinking mind, we're operating from a series of coded neurological patterns. These are called vasanas in Sanskrit. And a vasana is a tendency for our mind to have particular thought forms in a particular way. And most of that's not even ours. It's coded down through genetics, our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents. And then it's coded also through our early years of upbringing, our first 7 years. A lot of coding goes into the brain. What type of religion you were brought into, what type of political persuasion your parents had, what type of school you went to, what your friends thought, what sort of work environment you're in. And that creates this deep code of particular patterns of thought. But when we transcend in meditation, we liberate ourselves from that limited framework of thinking. We access this incredible field of possibility, and that's what makes for a very dynamic life when we start meditating.
Sure. It seems amazing that all those ideas are already there, and that we are a vessel, if you like, for those ideas to come through. And it, touching on the ego, because I know I also have a corporate role, so I know that very much. Like, there's the ideas, there's the business case, there's the market research, the benefits, you have to justify it. And so even coming back to the idea, that's not really our idea in the way that we kind of, like, you have the project sponsor or something like that. Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm just processing that as you're talking about it, because I haven't heard it put that way before.
Nothing's ours. Nothing is ours. We have this very deeply coded idea that we have something and we own something and it's mine. The body is not even mine. It's just something that I'm borrowing for 80, 90, 100, 150 years. But my consciousness is the field of consciousness expressing through this vessel. I came here with nothing. I'll walk away with nothing. I didn't come with a body. I picked up a body. I didn't come with a car. I picked up a car. I didn't come with a family. I picked up a family. I didn't come with my phone. I picked up a phone. But when I leave, I'll be departing with nothing. I'll leave the body. I'll leave the phone. I'll leave the family, and all of it will just disappear. And I'll go back into the field again. So it's a very egoic idea, and it's a cause of so much pain and suffering in our world, that I own something.
Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, you think about people with how many possessions they have and showing off their possessions, but it's really not, it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, I
I
just
wanted,
moved house and I packed over 200 boxes, and I'm thinking, it's interesting. I've got so many boxes of things, but I don't really own any of it. I don't have any of it. It's just moving it from one place to another place and unpacking it again. This is so stupid. When I'm an angel or in the ethereal kingdom, I won't have to do this again. It will be such a liberation.
yeah, it feels so much lighter.
Yeah.
um, bringing it back to the in the corporate space, so people embracing meditation, perhaps they're practicing meditation, maybe the people on the call, they're tuning in the morning, doing their meditation and then doing a meditation of the evening. What kind of shifts are you noticing in the conversations you're having with corporates, particularly around that beyond the rational mind that you mentioned?
Yeah, we've got to understand who our audience is when we're speaking to them. This is a really important part of being a teacher, is not knowing what we know, but knowing what our audience needs. And so particularly, at the moment, I've been working with Coca-Cola and Amazon and Qantas and many media agencies. And really the primary thing that they're looking for is to help them with the stress response, which is they're not sleeping very well. They might have low energy. They might have poor decision making, low productivity, maybe poor health. And so it's about dealing with those immediate concerns first and foremost. We certainly don't start talking about ascension and going into the ethereal realm and angelic kingdom. It's not quite the time for that.
Yeah.
So we just give them techniques that help them with those immediate concerns. Whatever the problem is, we just look for the solution and deal with that there and then.
Okay. And so the problems that people are coming up with are the very, like, the human body problems. Yeah.
Mainly anxiety and insomnia. They're the main ones.
Oh, wow.
Which lead to depression.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking around like device usage. Do you have any views on how device usage and insomnia might tie together?
Yeah, it ties very closely. Insomnia is a addiction to the world. It's an addiction to the world. It's the inability to let go of my attachment with the outside world, and that the thinking mind which has become fed. It's like a crack addict with constant crack being given to it by a very generous dealer. And that's what is happening with our phones and our mind. The mind will become addicted to thinking, addicted to pleasure, addicted to entertainment. And so when we keep feeding it without being mindful of that, and they're designed for having as much of your attention as possible. They're not designed to have as little attention as possible. They're designed to have as much attention as possible. So we have to be very mindful of the trap of the magnetic lure of the phones, Netflix. Even the CEO of Netflix said at his annual general meeting, the AGM, he said, we have 3 competitors with our business. We have Facebook, we have YouTube, and we have sleep. These 3 are competing against us and eyeballs on our screens. So, this is kind of where society's at, that this is what is happening with our screens, that's TVs, streaming platforms, our phones, is that they are just trying to vie for as much of your eyeballs' attention as possible. And if you're not mindful enough, you'll fall into that trap, because that trap's actually been designed for that reason.
So it's quite powerful what we can do with technology, and we also have this flip side as well, whereas, as you're saying, if you're not mindful, that you can be in the flip. I think just having that thought that the phone's not the master, or just being aware of that those systems were designed to have a certain response, and just being cognizant that, okay, like, I see that is a way that it doesn't have so much power over you as well. So I'm interested in also, what kind of shifts do you see coming in the next wave of corporate, when people are meditating more, they are aware of, the power of technology and how to use it to best serve their purpose, rather than being a servant to technology. So what are some of the shifts that you're seeing and excited to see as well in corporate?
Yeah, we're about to go into a very new phase for humanity and for the planet. It's a phase that is a critical phase. We're coming out of a 10,000 year period of time where most of what we do is for our own personal, interests, whether that's a company that we built that has 10,000 staff, or whether it's an association or an organization, or whether it's just your own individual pursuits. That's a very me-centered, ego-centered driven way of operating in the world. And we're about to move into an awakened society. Potentially, we may not get across the line. So humanity's on this fork in the road where it's has a high degree of possibility that it may not be here in 500 years, 1,000, 10,000 years time. There's a very high probability of that. There's also a probability that we move into a very awakened time where individuals and corporates have realized, no longer living in ignorance, but have realized their essential nature, their true qualities. And that's going to come by and large through certain practices. It's why meditation is becoming mainstream. It's why plant-based medicine is becoming mainstream. It's why yoga is becoming mainstream, because these are tools that help us realize this fundamental truth and get out of our ego self-serving desires and into a more collective way of operating. So what we will see, hopefully, as we move across that threshold, if we make it, is that corporations, which are basically groups of people with a particular state of consciousness, and as they expand their consciousness and transcend their own individual egoic pursuits, by default, they'll start building corporations, organizations, companies that are purely for the health and wellness of the whole. That's not just humans, but also taking into consideration the human position in the planet in a more equal and balanced portion with plants and animals as well. We're all competing for the same things, but humans have had a very dominating sort of influence on the planet and in pushing out the other living entities that are here. And so we have to rebalance that. And in a more awakened society, we'll see a lot more rebalancing of the human position in amongst with the plants and animals. And corporations will be part of that process, hopefully, you'd imagine, in a new awakened world.
And the piece on that, we are the corporation. So I know they, in a legal structure, they have an identity and it's a thing. However, when you get to who makes up the organization, well, it's people in businesses, it's people like humanity in employees, like we're people forming that. So you would think that the more and more people who become more aware, more conscious, more awakened, less about the little I, more about the big I, that would ripple out into a transformation in what exactly is this organization here to achieve?
Yeah, absolutely. And so you're exactly right. We have this perspective that organizations are a brand, a logo, a share price. We've had, unfortunately, we have this very disconnected relationship with these corporations, not realizing that it's actually not just a group of people that are going to work in the corporation, but there's a group of people that sit around a boardroom table to make decisions about that organization. Now, they are just they're just people in an organization, but they're not the organization. They're people that collectively make decisions or individually make decisions, that go to work, they go home, they've got family, they've got kids, and they have a particular way of thinking and feeling. And as we start to see humanity get out of our egoic tendencies and out of our minds and into our hearts and into our realm of consciousness, we will by default start to see those people, as they go to sit around their boardroom, start asking bigger questions. Listen, guys, I think we really need to consider our impact on the way we're running our business. And yes, we do have some responsibility to shareholders, but it's not as big as the responsibility we have to our staff and the planet itself. And we must put that in front of the importance of making sure that our dividends get back to our shareholders, that we have a company that actually supports and elevates the whole. That's going to be a shift and reweighting of values. And that's what we'll see in the new world, is a revaluing of core values, a shifting of core values.
What's beautiful about that, as I was listening, is that the perspective of the people and the humanity receiving from the organization, dividends are one form of that. There are many ways that an organization can give back to the planet, can give back to humanity as well.
Yeah, absolutely. This is again the reweighting of values. We don't value the ocean. We value the whale in the ocean. We don't value a tree. We value the 4x2 that comes out of the tree. We don't value bees. We value the honey that comes from bees. We've got a value system in the world currently that's a commoditized value system. How can I commoditize something so I can sell it and make money? Because what we put on more than anything is our greatest value is on money. And it's become so dirty and so polluted in our relationship that we'll almost cross any line to have more of it. Generally speaking, not for everyone, obviously.
Yeah.
But this is why companies will cut corners, or why they will potentially do things knowing they're not generally for the betterment of humanity, but because they're good for their shareholders, because they're good for money. And we're seeing that largely, unfortunately, and not to go down this rabbit hole, but in the pharmaceutical industry, which is going to be dragged over hot coals, I think, in the next many years, as we start to see this shifting of values, where we have to really reconsider everything that we're doing and make sure that everything is going to be supporting and elevating the whole.
On the topic of values, for someone who's listening who is hearing this and they're thinking, the values that I have, I know what they are about myself, my values for my team. However, what might be some ways that people can tune into those probably highest consciousness is probably the phrase, to receive in those values to then inform the work they do with their teams, which ripples out to their organization and so on?
I think the first thing is to really understand the mechanics of cause and effect. This is one thing that took me a long time to realize, that every action has a corresponding reaction. And when I was doing self-serving actions that were purely to satiate an immediate desire of mine, regardless of the consequences that it has on other people, the ensuing byproduct of that, which would be the reaction, never was really that great for me. And when I started to become more conscious and more aware of my actions, and trust me, I'm not a saint still, and I'm not enlightened, so I still have karma, and I still get this whiplash from nature, from the universe, when I do something that is purely self-serving and self-motivated for my own egoic tendencies. It's almost immediate these days, and thank goodness the universe is so rapid in ensuring karma to me, because it teaches me very quickly to adapt and change, which comes back to our meditation, because we have greater adaptive capacity, which means we can learn more quickly. But when we don't have adaptive capacity and we get this ensuing karmic consequences, we look at certain pharmaceutical companies had billions of dollars of lawsuits. It's like, without adaptive capacity, they just keep doing the same thing, even though they keep getting major karmic consequences because of their actions aren't actually aren't supporting the uplift and the wellness of the whole. This is not to completely discredit the pharmaceutical industry, because they play an important role in health and wellness in the planet. It's just that if we don't have integrity in any of our actions, and not to pinpoint just one particular industry, because it's all of us, we're all in this, we're all individuals, all making karmic choices that have consequences when it's not supporting and elevating the whole. So when it comes back to the question you asked, I would start to look at what are the long-term karmic consequences of our actions, and how do we do something that will it may not generate the best financial results, but it may generate the best overall result as a whole. And I think that's something which again comes back to rare value and core values, reassessing core values.
Yeah, I feel like that's another conversation on the kind of results that people look for, not just financial in that. And we've touched on so many things. I think it's so incredible just how expansive that this next wave of holding, thinking for as an organization, what is the karma we want to create for future generations. I think that's it's a huge concept. if people are interested in what you're talking about, because I know there's more, there's a whole ocean of that. Tom, where would they find you? What's the best way to connect with you?
Two main areas they could probably find me is Instagram is where I'm most active, at Tom Cronin. So it's just my name, Tom Cronin. And they can send me messages there or follow my work there. And then also on my website, Tom Cronin, again, just tomcronin.com. So yeah, this is a lot of what we're discussing here is what we cover in our conscious leadership mastermind group called the Zen Academy for Transformational Leadership. And it's really about helping to cultivate and accelerate conscious leadership in the world that has these values at the forefront of what they're doing and helping them get their message out to the world. So that's something that's open to everyone. There is a membership fee if they want to be part of that. We have fortnightly calls where people can be part of that community. And it's really about two things. One is me inspiring them and giving them tools and techniques and strategies and inspiration to keep getting their message out to the world and stepping up because we need this now. And secondly, it's giving them a sense of community because it can be very isolating at times. We're still a minority in the planet at the moment, and that can be a little bit lonely at times because sometimes we can be seen as kind of a bit wacko and a bit out there, even in our own families and friends circles. So having a sense of community is really important, I think, going forward.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, there's a whole nother story about wacko. Yeah,
yeah, we can discuss that another time.
Yeah. And so one of the things that we love to do is, because meditation is such a expansive topic, is to give a meditation to the people who are tuning in. So Tom, I'd love to create that opportunity for you if you would love to lead a meditation. And
Sure.
over to you.
Okay, yeah. So what we'll do is we'll do a very simple guided meditation, which is what I call a concentration technique, where we're going to use some degree of discrimination about the nature of our mind, and we're going to use some proactiveness about what our mind's doing. And our mind, just as a bit of a prelude to this meditation, we'll meditate for about sort of 10-ish minutes. And what we're going to do is we're going to retrain the mind to no longer be sort of just splashing its attention wide and far across as many different platforms or areas as possible, but to actually narrow it down into one single point. And what this does is that when the mind becomes centrally focused, it has this incredible de-exciting effect on the nervous system and allows a recalibration of the physical body. It allows a healing process to take place. That's the parasympathetic nervous system to activate in the body. And it also allows the mind to have a bit of reprieve. Now, there will be some resistance in the mind as it does find this a little bit boring. So we'll try and find things a little bit more enticing and a little bit more engaging at times. So it's up to us, the consciousness itself, not the mind, to have some sovereignty over the mind, some authority over the mind, and keep bringing it back to this single point. Okay, so I'll take everyone through it now. So let's just all close our eyes, sitting comfortably in a chair with our hands in our lap. And if you want to be cross-legged, you can, but you can just have your 2 feet on the ground. And we'll notice as we're sitting here that there's an effortless breath moving in and out of our body. Throughout most of the day and night, we're completely oblivious to the movement of that breath. But we'll observe it now as it ebbs and flows in and out of the body. And it's been ebbing and flowing from the moment you came out of the womb, night and day, 24/7. Now just allow it to be a very natural breath. It's unforced. It's just whatever your body's requirements are. And as it ebbs and flows, I want you to notice that it's starting to move through the nostrils. And as it's moving through the nostrils, I want you to notice that there's a slight cooling effect around the rim of the nostril. It's very subtle. And this is where the air is brushing the moisture on the skin ever so slightly. very gentle. I want you to keep your awareness on that cooling skin. Whenever the mind drifts away, just bring it back to that single point. It's okay that the mind will drift. It will go off looking for things. But just bring it back. The practice is bringing it back, returning it to that single point of the cooling skin around the rim of the nostril. Just stay with the breath. Keep the attention on the cooling skin around the rim of the nostril. Letting go of everything else with that one single point of your awareness. The breath will be subtle, very gentle breath now. Very subtle flow of air brushing the skin around the rim of the nostril and cooling it. Just a little bit longer now. Really surrendering into the quiet, the peace, the calm. Stay with the gentle breath, cooling the skin around the rim of the nostril. And now keeping the eyes closed, just letting go of the meditation. Really just sit for a few moments at the end of the meditation. Just starting to bring our awareness to any sensations in the body, any space in our mind. Letting the mind wander a little bit more now. Slowly emerging out of that quietness. Starting to be aware of the room and any noises in the room, any activity in the room. And when you're ready, you can slowly open the eyes.
That was Tom Cronin, the King of Calm, with his concentration meditation. Thank you so much to Tom for being with us on the show today and so generously sharing with us. If you love this episode, there are a couple of things you can do. First, you can share it with your colleague, friend, or family. Second, you can subscribe to where you get your podcasts. And third, if this is really your vibe, you can rate the podcast, leave a review, and I'd be so grateful for that. And I'd also like to open up an invitation to the Facebook community, the Eastern Influence Corporate Leader community, where you can join and continue the conversation. If that's something that you're interested in, send me a DM on Instagram and we can connect you in. So thanks for listening. I'm so grateful for you tuning in, and I hope you have an amazing week.